Hello and welcome to another Retropower Uncut from our new rolling road. I wish. It's actually Roger Clark Motorsports' very impressive facility, which we've been using. Thankfully, we've actually been able to park this down here for the last week because they haven't had anybody else in here. If you remember from the last episode, we had a few complications to get through, and then by the time we ran out of time that day, and then Alex decided to be poorly for a week. But he's totally back to health now, and he's going to tell you about what he's been up to in a minute. But today, as far as I can make out, has been a really successful day. It seems to have been a great session all round because we've not had any leaks, which is always nice to see. It's always a bit nerve-wracking when the first time the engine's run, it's already in the car. It's the benefit of having an engine dyno is you can dyno the engine out of the car to check for leaks, and it's much less traumatic to sort them out if there is. So it's nice to see that there wasn't any leaks. I haven't seen any from the axle, fingers crossed. I haven't had a proper look at it, but it looks good in that respect. And as far as Alex hasn't relayed any issues about the gearbox not working properly, so and there's not a big pile of rods on the floor, so I think we'll call that generally a win. It's made almost exactly the power we thought it would make. It makes an absolutely incredible noise. So I think I'm going to call this a successful visit. And I'll hand over to Alex in a sec just to fill you in on his side of the story, shall we say, and then we'll head back over to the workshop to carry on.
My name is Alex Halls. I work at DTA Fast, and today I've been mapping Project Utah. The process for mapping is fairly simple. It's just a case of sorting out the fueling and the ignition timing, and then making it so it's drivable at part load. Incredibly important for a road car, and then trying as best you can to sort out cold start issues. Aside from that, it's just a lot of time going through everything, checking it's all right, checking for leaks, checking there's no obvious mechanical issues, and just cracking on with it.
And as if by the magic of television, we're back in the workshop. So Utah's back here safe and sound. We're going to crack back on with the interior. So we were basically at the point that we were going to start building the center console on that because we have all the components ready. Just got interrupted by the visit to the rollers. So we'll be cracking on with that next week. In the meantime, we've been working quite a lot on the Chevette this week. James has been doing the carbon trim panels. I mentioned last week, I think, that we were cutting those all from one big 8x4 sheet of carbon fibre that we had laid up. He'd already templated them, so it was a case of cutting them out and just tweaking and fettling until the fits are all perfect. That's looking really good now. We're going to it's got a temporary set of bolts just holding those in at the minute. We're going to have another set of bolts Xylan coated so it all looks black. And we've also got some little washers to go behind on the reverse face because where the bolts go in, we've riv nutted where the original plastic trim clips go on the original car, and on the door frame they're actually recessed in by maybe 1 mil, so when you do the bolts up it kind of bends the carbon in slightly and gives a little bowed looking area around each bolt. So we're going to make some little, just glue in some little 1 mil thick nylon plastic washers around every one of those holes, just so when the bolts are done up they still look nice and flat. So that's looking really good. Fuel tank has now gone in. Scott had previously made up the stainless steel straps that strap the fuel tank down. Clean those up, give them a nice brush finish, lined them with neoprene and lined the area under the tank with neoprene. So then it was a case of just connecting the fuel hoses up, getting that tank in, getting it strapped down. Going through tightening all the fuel lines up. I mean, we're basically on the countdown to first fire up. So this week we've mainly been going through anything that relates to that first engine fire up. So getting all the fuel system fittings, making sure they're tight, getting the tank connected, getting the wiring connected. Yesterday, oh God, I've forgotten his name. I think it might be Chris from Bremax came over and dropped off the engine management wiring loom. Got that all into place loosely. There were a couple of bits he wanted to do in situ, so the coil packs, we're running Hayabusa coil packs on this Vauxhall C20XE because they fit into the original plug holes really nicely and the height of them fits under the original plug cover. And he wanted to just check the orientation of those to get the plug angles to make sure the wires sat really perfectly on those before terminating them. So he's done that, got the engine management loom laid in there. So that's looking really good. So we're going to go around and just finish off some wiring, tidying up. John's been finishing the dry sump plumbing. There was one remaining pipe. The pipe that was originally supplied with the engine, that's the rear scavenge from the sump pan to the scavenge pump, was really tight on the steering rack. So we've switched that to being the other side. There's alternate ports on the dry sump pan the other side. So we've got it going out the other side now and round to the scavenge pump, which avoids that problem. That's basically the oil plumbing tied up, all the fittings tightened. James is just working on the mounting for the breather tank for the dry sump system. So dry sump tank is what you fill with oil. The pump that's in the scavenge pump that's basically constantly scavenging any oil out of the bottom of the sump pan also scavenges any blow-by on the piston. So that what would normally be your breather out of the cam cover is all scavenged out by the sump pump and basically blown back to the sump tank along with the oil. So that vapour has to go somewhere. There's an outlet at the top of the dry sump tank. That goes to a catch tank, which is there basically just to, it should never get any significant amount in it. It's just there in case any oil does blow out of the breather on the dry sump tank to catch it and stop it going all over the engine bay. So we're just making up some bosses to mount that onto the, basically piggybacked on the back of the recess where the tank itself sits. And he's just machining up some little spacers for the upper alternator bracket. So we've got a Wasp alternator on it, and their billet lower mount, and then it basically has a rose jointed turnbuckle for the top mount. But because of the articulation on the rose joint, you have to space it up slightly because you run out of articulation and it basically stresses the rose joint when you pull the bolt down. So he's just doing that, so that will finish off the alternator. We're just about to get the battery in and do the battery power cabling and start clipping some of the engine management loom properly into place. Pretty much with the countdown to Monday. It's Thursday today. Hopefully get the majority of that done tomorrow. Then on Monday, Dave Rowe is coming over. So he's reasonably well known in the sort of UK motorsport electronics circuit. He's got an awesome short wheelbase Quattro that he's run up Pikes Peak at least once. I'm not sure if maybe more than once. And he's involved in quite a lot of cool projects in the UK. Well, he's one of the Motec dealers in the UK. He supplied the Motec parts that are on this, and he's the man I would choose for when it comes to Motec programming. So he's coming over on Monday. He did all the initial ECU setup, program the PDM, and hopefully we'll go for first fire up. There's a few things we're going to do beforehand. We're going to crank the sump pump over and try and get some oil pressure on the engine. do a basic fire up of the electrical system so we can see that there is actually power to the PDM and the ECU and the Motec display. And if we're happy with all of that, he can then take over, hopefully go for first fire up, and then once we're happy that it runs and idles well and the basic electronics are all functioning, then it'll be ready for a rolling road session in a couple of weeks' time, where Dave will come back and do the full mapping session on it. So this is getting perilously close to being running, and perilously close to the point we can get everything buttoned up on the interior. And at that stage, it's getting really close to being done. We've just sent off a load of aluminium parts, which I think we failed to get any footage of, for anodising. So the rear lamp surrounds, might have got some footage of them before, but they've been machined from solid aluminium, and they've just gone for black anodising. The mounts for the Motec keypad also just gone for anodising. The front caliper brackets and disc bells have. There's probably some other bits I've forgotten as well. But yeah, getting there. Also, Kaiser 2, which has just been sitting in the background for ages because we've been waiting on Bilstein to do a revision to the rear dampers. They finally arrived yesterday, I think it was, so we're ready to crack on with that. So next week we'll be swapping those over, and then we'll be in a position to start road testing with the revised design and see how we get on with that. The Stratos, which is just out of view, been a little bit neglected over the last month or so. We're going to be back on with this as well, so we've started doing some of the design jobs that have been in the queue for a while. The gear knob, the little knobs that slide the windows up, so it's one of the things I love about these. It's a real sort of basic design, but somehow really cool just because of it, that the windows just slide up by literally pulling them up, and there's a knob that you twist to lock that off. And we wanted to do put our own stamp on that, and the gear knob also, we've done we will be doing a machined aluminium gear knob with a little leather insert around it, which is George has just designed the knob, laser etched in the top with the gear pattern. And so we've basically done a slightly miniaturised version of that knob for the window lift knobs, which you turn and lock the window in whatever position you want. So they're ready for machining, and also the door release handles. It's one of the parts, the few parts, in fact, on these kits that still require a Fiat X19 donor part. Is the exterior door handles are, and they have been used. The interior ones should be as well. Not mad keen on the look of them, so we've decided to do our own, which is just going to be like a little leather pull strap that you pull forward, and that just has a pull cord attaching it to the door latch mech. So we've done some really nice bezels for those that have a sort of diagonal slot that the leather strap will come through, and just finish that nicely where it comes through the door card. So they're ready for machining as well. And then that's all part of a drive now to try and get the interior together on this. The column shroud's been done, that needs to be sent off for flocking, and we're ready to put the carpets in. So with the carpets in, the column shroud flocked, we can then get the column back in, we can get the Motec, Life Racing in fact, display in, and we can get the steering wheel on, which we didn't, the last time we were mocking up all the steering column, we were still waiting for the steering wheel, which is a really cool two-spoke Momo wheel. And we can get the door cards done with the little bezels, get the gear knob on, get those window knobs on, and the interior will really start coming together then. So we can then crack on with a few of the other little design jobs. The louver panel we're going to do for here. The louvered vents we're going to have in these rear flanks here that take air out away from the charge cooler rads. So yeah, we're really on the home stretch. Just been awaiting us getting back onto it, which is the plan going forward. Follow me this way. Now, over the last few weeks, obviously Nat's taken over the metalwork half. Unfortunately, today he's not very well. This sort of terrible cold seems to have blasted through everyone here now, I think. Possibly with the exception of Stu. See you in the morning, Stu. So Nat unfortunately had to throw in the towel this afternoon and head home. So I'm going to do the metalwork tour. We'll pause here for a sec. This is the first sections of what will be the screen wash tank on the Morris. So we're going to do some machined tanks that sit on the bulkhead. Richard Stubley at Autodesk is designing those for us. On one side it's going to be the brake and clutch fluid reservoir. On the other side it's a combined tank that's split in two. So one half of it's a breather tank and the other half is the screen wash, but because it's only very small, it's essentially only going to be the fill part of the screen wash, which will then have a hose leading down to a bigger tank in the footwell, which is actually something we did for the first time in Gordon's Escort, where we wanted a tank that was physically the same size as the brake and clutch fluid reservoir for cosmetic reasons, but because it's not big enough, it then fed what was a footrest, or appeared to be a footrest in the passenger side, which was actually the screen wash tank. So we're doing something very similar on the Morris. In the footwell, the chassis design has resulted in a sort of strange pyramid-y shaped recess, effectively. So we're making the best use of that space by making this obscure shaped tank, which will sit into the footwell. This will be the face facing the passenger, that will be the passenger footrest, and then gives you a really decent sized screen wash tank that will then be fed from above through the bulkhead from the machine tank that sits on the engine bay side of the bulkhead. So that's going to look really cool, and I think next week we'll be able to show you at least the 3D print prototype of those tanks, which I'm hoping will look awesome. Tom's been working on the Land Cruiser, struggling to remember exactly where we were at last week. I think we just finished the bonnet repairs, and the majority of what we've been on with since then is getting everything together panel-wise, because it's the last stretch where we want to do a full build-up of everything panel-wise and make sure all the gaps and all the sort of finessing of the shapes are there. So we started, I think, getting the bonnet on, aligning that to the scuttle, because that's the scuttle and the main tub are obviously a fixed entity, so getting the panel gap between the bonnet and the scuttle set, that then dictates the angle of the bonnet and therefore the angle of the inner wings that meet up, sorry, the outer wings that meet up with it here. Getting all that lot aligned and set right. We had to do a little adjustment on the hinge that attaches to this front panel. Was actually slightly offset to one side. I don't know if that was by design or not, but certainly it didn't line up with the holes in the new front panel, and it was by measurements slightly over to one side of the chassis, so we've elongated the holes to get that central. Made a shim plate to replace what appeared to be just a piece of carpet that was jammed under that hinge originally, but it did need that shim to bring the front hinge up slightly to get all of the level of this correct when the bonnet's lined up with the scuttle. So that's now all looking great. We've done some little temporary shims in here at the moment, but they will be replaced with something permanent that will stop the two halves chafing. We'll probably do a little nylon shim spacer down there to stop any paint chafing between where the panels bolt up together. But with all of that done, the gaps on the front are looking spot on. He's thrown the rest of everything on, got the roof on, because that dictates kind of the spread of the side panels, the angle of the windscreen, etc. Door gaps are looking pretty good. I think we're basically just some hinge adjustment away from getting those spot on. I mean, they're not exactly Rolls-Royce pound coin panel gaps, but that's not the point with this car. You know, we want to keep it in keeping with the original, so it's not necessarily going to have millimetre accurate or millimetre width gaps, but we do want them to all be even and not look crooked and out of line. Hence this build-up phase. It's done some work on this quarter panel, because we realised that this quarter, which was the one we hadn't repaired, was quite distorted along this section. So we've tried to get all of that into a better state where we don't end up with any significant depth of filler on it. This corner here needed pulling out because it had pulled in a little bit where we'd repaired it. And then he's just working on the rear doors at the minute. It's all gone generally pretty well. I think the only bit that we weren't happy with is that this full quarter panel repair panel here just seems a little bit too long, probably only 2 mil, but it just with it correct around here and in line with the body side here, it just sat too far over here versus this panel, and you ended up with perfect gap right down to there and then almost no gap from there down. So he's just in the process of trimming that back and just reforming this flange down here to get it that whole line dead straight down there. I think at that stage we'll pretty much be there in terms of panel alignment. He's got to do then the final welds, this is the reason we haven't attached this cross member here to the quarters, was for this very reason, that we hadn't done the panel gap check, and of course not attaching that gives you scope to alter that width before the final welds go on there. So it's just adjusting that bit will be welded in, and then yeah, we can move forward. And on the sort of subject of the more exciting work that's ahead on this, George is working on the cam cover design. So as a recap on this, we're running a Toyota 1UZ V8. but we want to make it look almost 70s. So the plan is to do our own cam covers, and we're also going to have our own inlet manifold that converts it to like a 4-barrel replacement throttle body. And then we're going to do a pancake filter on that. So essentially it should look a bit of a nod to like a 70s V8 with a big carburettor and a pancake filter on, except it's actually a late 90s in fuel injected V8 quad cam 32 valve. So I think it's going to be a nice touch. George has started by doing the drawing of the actual flange where the cam cover goes onto the head. He's 3D printed a trial frame to check the proportions and the dimensions of that, which all look good. So now he's done that, he can move on to filling in the blanks and basically designing the cosmetic part of it. I think we're also going to design it so it incorporates coil-on plug units. So we'll run coil-on plug, sequential injection, control body, the ECU, rather than the distributor setup that it had originally. So that way you don't have to deal with the routing of plug leads, which were quite neatly done on this. Originally the plug leads are all under a plastic cover at the front, but we want to do away with all those covers and have it all just machined metal parts. So I think we've got a good plan on that. CV8, people have been saying what's going on with the CV8. We got to a certain point with it where we were slowing down slightly because one of the next steps is actually bodywork related, when we start doing all the prep work on this and perfecting the shapes, so we can then take the molds from it to make the carbon body that we're going to do for it. And coinciding with it edging over into bodywork, and our bodywork schedule was fairly full, the owner actually requested that we took a bit of a break on it. He's green lighted it again, there's no problem there, but at the moment, because of the paint booth conundrum that's going on, we can't really get any other car into the prep area at the moment anyway. So it's sort of holding fire until we free up the prep area, we can get it off the jig, onto its wheels and start doing that body prep work. So rest assured we'll be back on with it, just might be a couple of weeks. And Morris, which is absolutely on the last leg of metalwork now. Stu's been going through all sorts of details on it. In the boot he was working on mountings for a space saver spare wheel, which I think I mentioned before. He's been doing the mounts for the solenoid that will release the boot. He's been doing mounts for trim panels in the boot. He's done the mount for the subwoofer, which is actually going to now mount on the inside of the rear bulkhead area, and we're going to incorporate a surround for that into the upholstery. He's been doing the handbrake cable mounts, so we've actually been able to use MX5 handbrake cables. They route really nicely. He's made the bracket on the shell that the handbrake cable outers go into, and it leaves us with just a real short link to go in between the Escort handbrake lever and the MX5 compensator, which will just literally be like a rose jointed turnbuckle, so that's worked out really neatly. We've tackled the extremely perilous job, which I think we were building up to last time, of doing the bonnet louvres. We call that a shit or bust job, because basically if it goes wrong you pretty much scrap the bonnet, or at least you're going to have to spend a load of time welding a new piece in. But thankfully it went perfectly. We wanted to get those in there, because it's a nice touch in keeping with the fairly aggressive look that it's got elsewhere, but I was also quite conscious of the fact that the design of the engine bay doesn't have an awful lot of airflow area, if you like, in terms of through flow getting heat out of the engine bay. So I figured anything we can add to try and get a bit more heat out of the engine bay will be a good thing. So that's another thing. I don't know if we showed already, he finished all of the reinforcement section. That's looking really cool, the way he's done the reinforcer to stiffen this rear edge. And that sort of flows around into the shape of the latch holders here that hold the pins that latch into those receptacles at the bottom. So I think we've finally cracked what has been a fairly lengthy process to try and perfect the fit and method of opening and latching of the bonnet. So as part of the final mechanical build-up, we want to get the actual wheels. Through the whole process we've been using a set of mock-up wheels, which were basically the dimensions we wanted to use. They were 16-inch. The final wheels are 15-inch. And I've got the final wheels made very slightly further in to give us just a tiny bit more arch clearance. And I want to actually fit those wheels, and through a weird sequence of events, that actually means making the final colour choice for the car, because the wheel centres we're going to paint body coloured, they're split rims, and to build them without painting them means a load of hassle then to cut all the sealer back out to take them apart again. So it makes much more sense to make the colour choice, then we can paint the wheel centres, then we can bolt up and seal together the split rims, get the tyres on, get them on the car and do the final checks on all the clearances, which will be through all points of suspension travel, all points of steering lock, make sure we're happy with all of that. At that point we'll also spec the open and closed lengths for the front coilovers. And then I think we're pretty much at the point of blowing it all apart again and getting it ready to paint. There's going to be some lead work involved where some of the custom metalwork's been done, particularly around some of these areas. There's a little bit of leading needed and maybe just on the door shuts just to improve the fit. What you don't want is you can obviously use some degree of filler to get the lines perfect, but you don't really want it on a corner or an edge. So for instance, where the back of the wing meets the door, there might be some undulations in there which we might decide to lead or it would just be hammer work to get it to be perfect and filing across the gap so that we don't end up with a big build-up of filler on the edge of the panel. But yeah, I mean, we're very, very close to stripping this down and getting it ready for paint, which, on the subject of which, Gaz and Steve have been carrying on with the Camaro, which is the car that's trapped in our prep area. Now, although we can't get the shell out of there to carry on the next steps on the shell in terms of getting primer on it, all of the engine bay panel work on that car we have been able to crack on with. So we've designed a really cool kind of panelled in look to the engine bay that's really symmetrical with matching caps at the front. You've got a power steering tank cap one side and the coolant fill the other side symmetrically, and then further to the back you've got the brake fluid reservoir coming through a recess in the inner wing panel work, and then the other side will be a matching one that's for the screen wash. And then there's like a central rib that runs, then sweeps around from the front and runs over the centre of the engine right to the back to the bulkhead again, which kind of covers the valley of the engine. And on those panels, where the reservoirs come through, where the caps are, and also where there were some pieces let in for I think the hydraulic hoses for the power steering setup come into the engine bay from the side, there were various spot welded in recess components that Stu fabricated. And where those seams were that attached those, we needed to fully weld those basically and smooth them out so that we didn't, if you can't just fill over them, because if there's an open seam there that you fill, it'll always get moisture coming in from the back and start bubbling at some point in its life. So Gaz has spent some time basically lead loading those seams and filing them all out and sanding them out to be the right shape. So they're kind of a smooth return edge in the metal. Then they've done the filler work and prep work on those inner wings, and I'm glancing over there now, and through the window of the booth I can see him just cleaning those engine bay panels ready for presumably polyester coat. So it's nice to be able to push forward a little bit with the Camaro, even if we can't fully do it because of the fact the paint booth isn't finished. Although this week we have made some degree of progress because Nat and Rich have decided to crack on with quite a lot of the paint booth build themselves in lieu of the professionals who are building it actually being here. So they've finished all the repairs on the burner box, got that all into situ, got the heat exchanger in which they'd previously repaired, got all the front end panels and the doors on. And Rich has spent quite a bit of time also cleaning all the floor grids and all the framework that sits under those floor grids. There's various panels with holes in which are basically air restrictors, so you can vary or bias the airflow that goes down through the grids in the floor, so it's not all biased towards the area where the actual extraction fan is. So you can kind of throttle it back, that's probably the best terminology, throttle it back in the areas where it's naturally higher to try and spread the airflow evenly. So all of those plates and all the floor grids have been cleaned. So yeah, I believe the guys building the booth will be back tomorrow, and I'm assured that next week there will be some good progress, so we shall see, but next week maybe the booth will be finished. And on that note, we'll leave it. See you next time.